I like it because I know one thing for certain is that if you do get married, you must commit yourself to that.
Cliff Richard adored one woman for 50 years. She wed his best friend, then married another, then passed away in his arms. He never wed anyone, never had children, just continued to sing whilst concealing the greatest heartache in British music history. When police busted him at his pad in 2014, they weren't the first to break him. The BBC had done it first with a clandestine deal. The allegations were false, but the harm was there. He lost weight. He developed shingles. He couldn't sleep. He declared his own house to be contaminated. The man who had packed Wembley Stadium in the past now wouldn't go outside the door. On October 14, 1940, at King George's Hospital, Lucknow, British India, Harry Roger Webb entered a world already trembling under the weight of war and revolution. World War II raged on. Indian independence demonstrations were simmering over. Riots broke out in 1946 on Direct Action Day, and British families started evacuating the colony. Among them were the Webbs. Harry's dad was employed in the colonial system, but it was apparent by 1948 that the empire was crumbling. So they departed, not on a plane or a motor car, but on a slow, crowded boat traveling across the Indian Ocean. The SS Ranchi was their lifeboat. For 3 weeks of prolonged travels, it transported hundreds of British families, all departing the sole home they'd ever known. They moved from servants and sunshine to rationing and clouds. England was chilly and still recovering from war. The Webbs settled into a tiny house in Chorlton, Surrey. With them were gone spacious rooms and cozy evenings. It was a hard beginning for a boy who had grown up in comfort, but it hardened him. That journey planted something within him, an urge to prove himself, to make something greater of this strange new existence. And soon Harry Webb vanished. A man named Harry Grader X watched carefully. He handled talent and had a sense for trends. He explained to Harry, "You require a name that has a rock feel to it." Cliff, he proposed. Solid, British, strong, like the face of a cliff. And then there was Richard, a nod to Little Richard, the crazy American rock star. Harry Webb was no more. Cliff Richard had arrived. He did not merely alter his name. He transformed British music. On the 29th of August, 1958, a record titled Move It was released. It had a raw, loud, and defiant sound. Nothing so fine, so clean, so polite pop of the era. Cliff was just 18. The record reached number 2 in the UK and caused a shockwave. British teenagers finally had their own rock star. He was not imitating America. He was inventing something new. That one track opened doors for everyone that came after. The Beatles, the Stones, and so on. But not only the music. It was the madness. When Cliff toured that year, Britain lost its mind. Girls screamed, wept, and collapsed. Boys resented him for hogging the limelight. Security personnel could not stop the crowds. It was Elvis-style pandemonium. But this in London, Manchester, and Leeds. It had not happened here before. They called it Cliff hysteria. The press adored it. So did the record companies. In 1959, the insanity doubled. Cliff recorded Living Doll. He didn't want to. He felt the song was too mellow, too phony. "I hated it," he said to his producer. But the band transformed it into a slow, country-style ballad. It reached number 1 and remained there 6 weeks, selling 770,000. He received a silver disc in November. By January, he had a gold. Then there was Travel and Light, another number 1, 5 more weeks at the top. Between them, Cliff sold more than 1 million records. No other person in Britain had ever done that. Hollywood made contact. In 1959, Cliff starred in a dark, serious movie called Serious Charge. It wasn't lighthearted. It confronted homosexuality, false accusations, and weighty moral issues. Cliff was just 19, and it came as a shock that he signed up. A year later, he appeared in Espresso Bongo, a satirical movie that mocked the pop world. With these performances, Cliff made it explicit that he was not merely a teen idol. He desired to act, to mature, to be something else besides a singer. British pop stars had never done so. Then came Summer Holiday. The film was released in London on January 10, 1963. 3,000 of Cliff's fans poured into Leicester Square. Cliff wasn't even able to get out of his vehicle. He skipped his own premiere that night, but no matter. The soundtrack reached #1 on the UK album chart well before the movie even opened in the nation. It remained there for 14 consecutive weeks. Several of the songs from the movie hit #1. The Next Time, Bachelor Boy, Summer Holiday. Even the Shadows' instrumental, Foot Tapper, hit the top. The film was the second largest British box office success of 1963, only behind From Russia with Love. And in 1963, Cliff was named the most popular film star in the UK. But then the Beatles arrived. Everyone thought Cliff would be pushed aside. But in 1964, in the midst of Beatlemania, Cliff had 6 top 10 records. The Beatles could only muster 5. His records, such as Constantly on the Beach and I Could Easily Fall in Love with You, kept him under the spotlight. Even while the Beatles were changing music and invading America, Cliff was standing his ground back home. The war was on. His film Summer Holiday and the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night conflicted at the nation's cinemas. Both set records, but British crowds hadn't forgotten who got there first. Even Paul McCartney conceded it. He once boasted that the Beatles departed for Hamburg because Cliff had everything tied up in Britain. And John Lennon put it bluntly before Cliff Richard and Move It, there was nothing worth hearing in England. Something rather unforeseen occurred in 1965. New Musical Express conducted a poll of its readers all over the world. It asked fans to vote for the world's best male singer. Cliff beat Elvis. He beat Lennon. He beat McCartney. That year, the Beatles came out with Help and Rubber Soul. Elvis was still selling out venues, but Cliff took the prize. Why? Because despite the world changing around him, Cliff continued to change. He didn't attempt to emulate the Beatles. He didn't follow trends. He did an equal balance of pop ballads, faith-friendly movies, and real charisma. He was reliable, and to the fans across the globe, it made a difference. He was their rock before the British invasion and far past it. In June 1966, something that no one in the music industry anticipated took place. At Earl's Court, Cliff Richard emerged onto the stage, not to perform, but to stand alongside American evangelist Billy Graham and inform thousands of fans that he had become a Christian. This was not a private, personal choice. It was a public declaration heard throughout the nation. Fans who had known him as a British Elvis or Little Richard were left bewildered. Some wept, others stood there in shock. The man they admired for his defiant spirit had made a turn no one saw coming. But this act was not spur of the moment. It was the culmination of a spiritual search that began 2 years ago. Nevertheless, to do it in front of Billy Graham's huge crowd, smack dab in the middle of the swinging 60s, added a seriousness no one could deny. Rock musicians back then weren't supposed to speak about God. They were supposed to act up, live on the edge, and disobey. Cliff's statement contradicted what the culture assumed a pop icon should do. People quickly panicked. Some of his fans believed it marked the end of his music life. Insiders in the business spread rumors that he would retire and become a schoolteacher. That wasn't such a far-fetched thought. Cliff himself thought of giving the stage up for good. He thought perhaps he couldn't be a real Christian and remain in the public eye. The music magazines started speculating as to who would replace him. Booking agents dropped back. The industry thought you couldn't be a star and a spiritual person. And for a time, Cliff wasn't sure either. But then something shifted. Cliff did not vanish. He remained. And in the process, he made something entirely new. He didn't lose his faith, and he didn't lose music. But instead, he did a way of bringing the two together. He became the first large UK pop artist to openly live his faith without losing his chart position. No one had done it before. Not like that. He showed he didn't have to choose between one life and another. You could be truthful about your faith and yet pack concert halls. This was not a career survival decision. It transformed him. Cliff has since confessed that his rock and roll persona had been an act. He wasn't sure of himself. He was acting. But becoming a Christian changed all that. He explained, "My confidence increased. My attitude improved. It wasn't necessary to be right all the time. The pressure to play a part vanished. He was free to be himself. That newfound confidence allowed him to do better, even while the Beatles and Murray Beat groups topped the charts. While others attempted to catch up, Cliff became more powerful because he felt at last like himself. But by the mid-70s, Cliff's career plummeted. In 1975, for the first time, he had no songs in the charts at all. Everyone was assuming that his days were numbered. Then along came Devil Woman, released in April 1976. The track was loud, raw, and blacker than anything he'd produced previously. It was a weird tale about a psychic, a curse, and a stray cat. But most importantly, it rocked. It reached number 9 in the UK and number 6 in America, his first top 10 there. It sold more than 2 million copies. Cliff was home. Even more astonishingly, the hard rock fraternity welcomed him back. Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, and Elton John were seen sporting I'm Nearly Famous badges, endorsing his comeback album. These were guitar legends showing public respect for a man who'd once been seen as clean-cut and outdated. One music critic even went so far as to compare Cliff's new album to Marvin Gaye's best work. This was no return. It was metamorphosis. That 50s juvenile was now being touted as a serious rock artist. He didn't stop there. In 1987, more than 25 years into his professional life, Cliff issued Always Guaranteed, a contemporary pop record that shunned the naff synths of the era and sounded ageless. Drawing inspiration from Thriller, he collaborated once again with Alan Tarney. The outcome, a platinum-selling album, peaked at number 5 in the UK. It remained there for 24 weeks and sold in excess of 1.3 million copies. 4 singles from the album entered the UK top 40. Some of them even went silver, selling 250,000 copies. Cliff proved that even in the late 80s he could compete with the best. Then came Christmas 1988. Cliff released Mistletoe and Wine, a gentle, faith-filled holiday song. He recorded it with tinsel hanging over the mic in the middle of summer. The song debuted at number 7, jumped to number 1 the following week, and remained there for 4 consecutive weeks. It sold 750,000 copies in 6 weeks, and was the year's largest UK single, beating out U2, Kylie Minogue, and Phil Collins. It was platinum by 2024 and still made a yearly income of $100,000 in royalties. Even after decades, people never got tired